All right, so my name is Elise Lagerstrom, like you just said, and the title of my presentation today is ATV Mortality in the United States for the years 2011 to 2013. This data was gathered as a part of my thesis presentation, actually, and was funded by the Mountain Plains ERC, which is out of Colorado. Okay, so the purpose of my study was really to take a large database of ATV fatality claims and then analyze it for risk factors. And then once I identified these risk factors, I wanted to see what associations really existed between the risk factors to hopefully identify intervention strategies that could be enacted to target specific groups of users. So as far as my database was concerned, I obtained a database of 1,200 ATV fatalities in the United States, a nationwide sample. And just to show you what I kind of received, I picked out 2 cases out of Utah, actually, to share with you today. Okay, so this is the format I received from the Consumer Product Safety Commission. This is their standardized narrative report set up, and I'll read it for you today. This is a 16-year-old female who was killed. She was seen operating at high rate of speed on a 4-wheeler. She was texting with one hand and operating the throttle with the other hand. She ran off the road into a ditch and was ejected from her ATV, and she sustained fatal injuries at the scene. The second one I looked at from Utah, this was a 36-year-old male who was operating on an ATV with his girlfriend on the back. They were on a trail at first, and then they tried to cross the train tracks. The ATV was stuck, the train was approaching, and as they were trying to free the ATV, the guy got hit by the train, amputated his leg, and also died at the scene. So I read through 1,200 of these cases over the summer. It's a lot of fun, and then pulled out all these variables and put them into a database that I could use later on. So all of my data was from the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission is responsible for investigating deaths related to consumer products. So they do pools, they do roller coasters, and they do ATVs now. So since they began having an interest in ATVs, which was in 1982, to 2012, they've had over 12,000 ATV-related fatalities in the United States alone. And what recent studies really strive to do is determine the risk factors for these ATV fatalities. What they've come up with so far: male gender contributes to risk, young and old age groups, inexperience, lack of PPE, and of course drug and alcohol use. So there are 3 main classifications of ATV loss of control event. There's the overturn, which can occur in a variety of different ways. The forward overturn occurs while going downhill. The rider flips over the front of the handlebars and can be crushed by the rolling ATV. Backward overturn occurs in a lot of the same ways while going uphill commonly, but can also occur when the rider loads down the back of the ATV with passengers or maybe supplies that they're doing an occupational activity with. Side overturns can occur. Ejections commonly occur to passengers, and then striking objects or collisions into other cars, ATVs, or even trees. So there's been a lot of focus, especially recently, on preventing ATV injuries. This is a marketing campaign by the AAOS, or the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, on preventing ATV injuries. It's kind of just a wake-up call on what can you do to really prevent yourself from ending up in a trauma center. In addition, the CPSC has launched several campaigns to try to combat the rising injury rate. In 1988, their first attempt at this was the Consent Decree, which was a 10-year agreement with the major ATV manufacturers at that time to increase ATV safety. And there were really 3 main provisions of that decree. They prevented the sale of, and they prohibited the sale of 3-wheeled ATVs. They established a nationwide training program, which was subsidized for new ATV purchasers. And then they also included some recommendations on appropriate size and power output for youth ATV riders. After its expiration, 10 years later, they saw a rising ATV injury rate again and mortality rate. So they enacted the same sort of thing in 2008 under the CPSIA, or the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. This had all of the same provisions as the 1988 Act, but included more of a youth focus as well. So as I said before, I had 1,230 INDP reports, or in-depth investigation reports, for the years 2011 to 2013. So I went through, read all those, pulled out my variables of interest, and then classified each variable pertaining to the epidemiologic triangle, so the agent-host-environment model. So host variables that I came up with were helmet use, alcohol use, and age at time of death. Agent-related variables were excessive speed and type of LOC event, or loss of control event. Environmental variables were things like location type, terrain type, and region of the country. So I did descriptive statistics using SAS 9.3, and then the bulk of my research was using a chi-squared automatic interaction detector, which is a method of identifying associated variables with different set outcomes. And what you get out of that is a classification tree of partitions based on the chi-squared statistic. So I'll go through one of those with you a little bit later. These are some of my descriptive statistics. I had about 85% male fatalities, 14% were less than 16 years old, 12% were greater than the age of 64. Helmet use prevalence was about 11%, so 88% of fatalities were not wearing a helmet at the time of fatality or death. Alcohol use was positive in about 85% of cases, but we do have a very large number of unknown cases in that sample. The primary location type that these are happening on are streets, and that can be a variety of different kinds of street, public roads, private roads, dirt roads. They weren't really classified very well pertaining to street type. About 12% occur on the home and about 12% occur on farms. Also locations of interest for sure. And then about 60% of injuries were classified as head injuries, and then another 17 were classified as multiple injuries, or multiple body parts were involved in the fatal injury. So this is the chi-squared automatic interaction detector, and so I'll just go through with you. Go through this real fast. This is my population of data. So I chose helmet use to show you today because it's a very good example of just the partition of the data. So in my general population, I had 12% of users wearing their helmets at the time of fatality, and 88% were not wearing their helmets then. So then the variable most strongly associated, or that has the highest chi-squared value and the lowest p-value associated with helmet use, is location type. So then you have a significant split of helmet use prevalence based on location type. So users in industrial, sports, or public locations have a different helmet use prevalence than users on the street, farm, or home. And actually, users on the industrial, sports, or public areas have higher helmet use prevalence than the users on the street, farm, or home. By a pretty, helmet use prevalence on the street, farm, or home is only at about 8%. And these two are fairly large N numbers as well. I just want to note that. All right, and so then I further divided the table, and these are all significant partitions, a p-value of 0.01. And that's what the final tree looks like. And what you can do with this practical application is on the far left-hand side of the diagram, or far left side of the partition tree, is you have your cohort of users who have the highest helmet use prevalence. So those are the users who are operating in industrial areas, sports or public areas in the western, northwest, northeast regions of the country. And they have a helmet use prevalence of about 50%, which is not bad, but it's not really good either. And then on the far right-hand side of the tree, you end up with your lowest helmet use prevalence cohort. And those are users on the street, farm, or home who are over the age of 16. And in that group, the helmet use prevalence was only about 5 or 6%. So right here, you have a targeted group of people. It's very obvious that you can you need to look at street, farm, or home users who are over the age of 16. And that's the interesting thing is previous intervention strategies have really been aimed at children. And what we're seeing is there is a significant partition of the children having a higher helmet use prevalence than the adults. So adults are not using their helmets. Maybe our marketing strategies have been successful, maybe there's other reasons. But clearly there's another group of users that we aren't targeting right now that really need this intervention strategy. So conclusions related to host factors, helmet use prevalence, it needs to be improved. People are dying from head injuries still. Helmet use prevalence is about 12%. So right there is a very easy intervention strategy that we can now target to specific groups of users. I also wanted to look at injury versus fatality cases. My database was entirely fatality cases, and I really wanted to see, what separates the injury from the fatality? Who is surviving these things? And when I looked at a similar study, also using CPSC data, but of emergency room treated cases who survived, what I found was males are more likely to die in crashes, children are more likely to survive, and there's a lower prevalence of head injury cases in fatality cases. So basically, if you have a head injury, you're more likely to die, which makes sense. And so wearing a helmet is the obvious solution. Also, environmental factors were fairly prevalent as a separation point among different chi-squared analysis or chi-squared partition trees. Farming location type only made up about 12% of the fatalities. However, I looked at the farming mortality rate. So what is the mortality rate of ATVs, on ATVs in the farming population? And that was about 5 times the general population. So there's a fairly significant, focus area right there is the agricultural user of ATVs who are using their ATVs not only for occupational purposes, but also just for personal transport around their farm. And also, I just wanted to note the chi-squared automatic interaction detector as a method of identifying at-risk groups of users and potential groups of users for intervention strategies. I'd like to thank my thesis committee, as well as my grant sponsors, as well as the University of Utah for letting me present here today. Do you have any questions? Yes?
Do you have a feeling for any data that's out there for the type of off-highway vehicles, like the side-by-sides, and you have like a small cab over them?
Right. That is a growing area of interest because they are becoming much more popular. The CPSC has identified them in their definition as not an ATV, but a UTV or something. So they are tracking those statistics side by side currently. The benefits of the UTV is they do have the rollover protection, which is great, which is going to solve a lot of problems. But at the same time, the rollover protection is only beneficial if you're wearing the seatbelt. A lot of users will not wear the seatbelt. And in that case, if they're not wearing a seatbelt and they sustain some sort of loss of control, the roll cage is actually more likely to have a negative impact rather than a protective impact.
And then what about conversations in that?
It's still recommended, yes. I don't have any statistics on that, though. It is still recommended. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yes.
Are you working a PhD now?
Yes, I am.
So, are you continuing that research, or what is it?
I'm done with this data set, but I'm continuing ATV work. Yes. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Next. Thank you, Elise. Thank you.